That's
I'll
fine.
just make it real quick. Um, it is Monday, June 1st, and I'm talking to someone I've wanted to speak on for a while. For in terms of this particular interview, we're not necessarily going to get really into what's going on in the world. As you may know, there is an ongoing series of protests and riots throughout the U.S. This interview in particular is not about that. We may or may not touch on it. It doesn't seem likely. I just want you guys to be aware of that before. The person that I am interviewing, somebody I booked a few weeks ago, and somebody I really wanted to speak to. His name is Mr. Jeff Selingo. He is the author of several books, written a lot of articles and major publications regarding higher ed, in particular, like the behind the scenes of it. And so I really hope you guys take a time and listen. I think this might be a great interview to listen to, as well, as the world is currently on fire. That it's a good alternative to what's going on right now. So I'm going to let him introduce himself. And here's Mr. Jeff Selingo.
It's great to be here. I've been writing about colleges and universities for more than 20 years. Most of that time was spent writing for insiders, people who work at colleges and universities, including professors and administrators and even students. But in the last couple of years, I've been really focused on explaining higher education, colleges and universities, to the consumer audience, to students and parents and people who want to go to college or have graduated from college and want to know more about how it works.
Right. And so with that said, can you explain to people just the behind the scenes that you're talking about and how it works? Because a lot of people are still thinking of college conceptually, and you know so many about the details about it.
Yeah, so I know most of those details because I have worked for a variety of publications, including the Chronicle of Higher Education, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal. I've written for them on the topic of higher education, but I've also written a couple of books. College Unbound, there's Life After College, which were 2 New York Times bestsellers. And then this fall, I have a new book coming out called Who Gets In and Why? A Year Inside College Admissions, where I spent a year actually embedded in the college admissions process.
Right. And I actually want to piggyback on that, which is in regards to college admissions, what is something that people don't or get misconstrued about the admissions process?
So I think that most people think it's hard to get into college when it's actually now 60. Most colleges accept about 60% of
Hmm.
those who apply. So it's a
Okay.
lot easier to get in than I think people believe.
Okay. And one of the things in which I think is really interesting that brought me up to a lot of your writing is this notion of we've seen now, because of COVID-19, a lot of people who are taking online classes or working from home. You actually written a book that predates this a bit, called, and maybe if I got it wrong, MOOC you
Yep.
or
Yep.
okay. And can you explain to people what a MOOC is and what the
Yeah.
book was about?
So MOOCs, so the book was an ebook, which is why I didn't mention it earlier. So it was a short book that I put out in probably 2014, maybe. And MOOCs are massive online open courses, and these became pretty popular back in about 2012, where professors would essentially get on um, uh, and broadcast their courses for free to the world. And that's why they were massive, because hundreds of thousands of people signed up for them. They were open, meaning they were free, and obviously they were online. And the idea was that this was going to kind of revolutionize education, because people could learn about anything, anywhere for free. Now, that didn't quite happen. And as I explain in the book, most of the people use these courses because they wanted to take one class within the course. So
Mm.
some of these courses would last a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and they wanted to take one class. And so most of the people, it wasn't a traditional college course in that way, because most of the people just decided, I want to take this one class because I want to learn about one thing specifically. So they didn't really have the impact that most people thought they would have back in 2012.
Okay. And so you've written something that was really ahead of the curve. And I want to ask you now, and compare it to what you've written about and what you've seen in that regard of online education. How is that compared to the number of people now who inadvertently have had to take courses through like Zoom or Google Hangouts or things like that?
Well, it's amazing, right? So now everybody is essentially an online student in some
Yeah.
way. And what's, I guess, frustrating to me is that 8 years after we started to really kind of perfect online education, is it's
Hmm.
kind of bad right now, right? It's
Oh,
not
really?
great, right?
Okay.
I think most people out there who've taken a course, or their kids have taken a course over the last couple of months, they realize that if we were so good at online education, why is it so bad in some cases? And that's what's kind of frustrating to me, because if you read the book or read anything about the MOOC movement back in 2012, there was a lot of knowledge about how we learn and how we best learn and how we should use this medium online. And some professors learned it, and some teachers learned it, and they're doing really well at presenting their courses online, but most aren't.
Okay, now I want to ask, why is that most aren't doing well in that regard?
Well, because I think that for the most part, we still teach the way we taught back in the prehistoric days, right? It's a
Okay.
teacher at the front of the room, as we call it, the sage on the stage, right? They are the star on the stage lecturing to people in front of them. And that's, if you go to most elementary schools and middle schools and high schools and most colleges, that is how most people teach. And that's not the best way to learn online, right? The best way I learn online is maybe we watch a video and we might write about the video, and then we get on to a webcast and we talk about it with other students, right? There's different ways of designing learning
Gotcha.
online. And I talk about this in the MOOC book, short videos, for example, that are only a couple minutes long, and then you do an assessment. So you might do a short quiz at that point. You might have people write some thoughts down, right? You're sitting in a room, sitting online for 50 minutes and hearing somebody lecture at you is
Mm.
not the best way to learn.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up because that was actually one of the criticisms I see a lot of people, especially my friends who have parents or people I know, were just saying that the kids would kind of tune out after, like you said, 50 minutes, 30, 45 minutes. And it actually brings me to something else regarding online education. You can speak to this as well, which is the number of people who are saying they're being educated by YouTube as a medium versus like their teachers. Can you speak on that at all?
Yeah, a lot of people, right?
Okay.
When I just bought a basketball hoop for my kids, and possible to put together. So I went on YouTube, and there were tons of people like me and you who are putting the same thing together, and they did a video of it, right? And so when I need to learn how to cook something, or anytime I buy a new product, I don't look at the manual that comes along with it. I go on YouTube. And so it's the same thing when we want to learn anything. I think more people are jumping on YouTube to learn how to do algebra or whatever it might be. Because again, I think that other people have faced the same frustrations, whether it's their own learning or their kids' learning, and they have gone out and they've designed these really good either courses, or they've even designed these great YouTube videos.
Right. And so it's been interesting to see the last couple of weeks, really, in regards to where American education has kind of went. I don't know if this is a permanent change or if this is temporary, but it definitely has been a real noticeable change. In your opinion, as somebody who studies higher ed a lot, how has higher ed as a industry really been affected by this move to online immediately?
Well, they didn't, as I said, they didn't do a great job at it. I think that you see a number of colleges and universities now talking about getting back on campus,
Hmm.
because that's how they make their money. That's how, people think of the residential college experience. And what's unfortunate to me is that, the fastest growing learner in the US and around the world is not an 18-year-old.
Oh,
But
interesting.
it's somebody who's in their mid 20s or mid 30s or mid 40s, and now might be unemployed, by the way. It might need to learn a new skill. Well, they're not going to go onto a campus and take a class. They're definitely not going to live on a campus, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to take advantage of that typical college experience we all think of. And so online education is a great resource for every other type of learner, including the 18-year-olds, but definitely everybody else and beyond. And the problem now is that most colleges and universities don't have as much of an interest in serving those students, when that is really the biggest audience out there. If you're thinking of audience, there's a much larger number of people trying to get a education who are, again, in their 30s and 20s and 40s than there are 18-year-olds looking to live on a campus for 2 or 4 years.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because it actually segues into my next question is there's been some slow movement of people who are now, it's been going on for like the last decade or so, people questioning the notion of the value of a college degree, especially related to the cost. Do you think COVID-19 is going to exacerbate that conversation, or is it kind of already moving in that direction?
Well, I think it's definitely going to accelerate it, because I think everybody complained about the cost of education before this crisis, right? And you heard that, every time I went somewhere and people knew that I wrote about this, the first question they would ask is, why does college cost so much?
Right.
And the fact that we have 30 million plus Americans right now unemployed. More people probably going to join them in the coming months. It's clear to me that you can't continue to charge what you've been charging for higher education at a time when, especially people who are unemployed, will need education in order to find new jobs. They will need to gain new skills in order to get a job in the future.
Right. And I just want to ask you just, you said it, I just kind of want to go back to that for a second. For the people at home who may listen, why does it cost so much to go to college?
Ah, that is the $1 million question. And it's because it's incredibly people focused, right? If
Mhm.
you go to a college campus, it's like a mini city. There are tons of people who work there. It hasn't, as a result, it hasn't become more efficient, right? You still need one professor to teach to 50 kids, just like you did back in the 1980s and the 1950s. And so the expenses continue to go up because it's very people focused. If we were to move away from the physical college campus and move closer to something that's more online, you could cut some of those costs, and thus the price of education could come down. But again, I don't think most people are interested in that because they think face-to-face education is still the best.
Got you. And so um, this gets into my next question. It is uh, coming into the fall of this year, there's uncertainty for many universities on what to do if not outright open up your universities. In your opinion, what do you think universities are going to do just with the fall semester about 3 months away?
Great question. And I think that you see most universities now announcing some plans to get back on campus. And I think that's because so much of their revenue is attached to that, right? People pay tuition, especially to a residential college where they think they're going to live and learn. They're not paying that tuition to learn at home in the basement. At the
Right.
same time, you have students learning and living on campus as well as eating on campus, and all that provides you revenue as well. You have sports that people go to see, you have coffee shops, you have all this revenue associated with being on campus. So I think most colleges and universities, as you see now, are announcing or intend to come back in some form or fashion because they need students to kind of commit with them and come back with them.
Okay. And so I want to ask, kind of saying on that for a minute, what is that new, in your opinion, what does that new college experience actually look like for either teachers or students when they come back?
You meaning this fall?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be different. It's unclear what the COVID situation will look like in the fall, but I can't believe it's going to be that much better in a couple of months. Social distancing is going to have to continue, and so campuses are pretty dense places. There's people are pretty close to each other, right? They go to parties, they go to classes together, they live together in dorms. So what I think is going to happen and what institutions are planning for is just to create more space on campus. So have fewer students on campus at any one time. Some of them might be taking online classes from their dorms while others go to class or from their homes. There will be fewer people in dorms. You'll have to make reservations to go to the dining hall to eat. So I think it's going to be a very different experience for students this fall. And I don't think we have the full understanding of what it's going to be like yet.
Right. And I think that this gets into my next question for you, which is you wrote a great piece with Richard Florida that came out a few weeks ago in the Wall Street
Yep.
Journal. And it really piggybacked on what you're saying right now, which is how COVID is essentially affecting urban universities and what that means for universities going forward. Can you explain to people what that article is about?
Yeah, so urban universities have been incredibly hot for the last 20 plus years. As cities have become incredibly popular, so too have their universities. And so when you look at enrollments of universities everywhere from New York to Boston to Philadelphia to LA to Seattle, et cetera, you see places that where the universities in those cities have done very well. They really attract students who want to live in close proximity to arts and culture and music and restaurants and so forth. Well, the problem, as we pointed out in this article, is that everything that attracts students to cities is also the thing that spreads the disease, meaning living in close proximity to each other, the restaurants, the culture, the sports, all that stuff. So what we worry about, what Richard and I wrote about, is that we worry about that there will be fewer students wanting to come back to these cities in the fall because of COVID-19. and thus, it's going to affect the health of those institutions as a result.
Right. And I'm going to just, because this is kind of more of my day-to-day specialty is like urbanism, gentrification, and
Yep.
planning. I just wanted you to kind of specify with people, because I know some people are going to listen to this, especially in the Atlanta area, and they're going to say, well, my kid's not going to go to Atlanta and Georgia State or Georgia Tech, which are directly in the city, right?
Yep.
They may want to send their kid to a school that's on a farm.
Yep.
Can you explain to them what that means when you talk about not just like urban schools, and then urbanization around schools? Because I think sometimes they may get a little confused about that.
Well, so there are so many more. I went to school in a rural area, and I probably do it again. But I'm a big fan of cities. I spend a lot of time in cities. I live in one in DC, and the opportunities to go to school in a city are incredible, right? You could work, an intern in a place at the same time you're going to school, which is very difficult to do in a rural area. It offers up opportunities for culture and diversity in ways that don't exist in many non-urban areas. As I said earlier, sports and museums and restaurants. I mean, obviously, all that stuff is really expensive when you're a college student, but it offers you opportunities that being out on a farm, as you say, just not the same, right? You
Right.
just don't have those opportunities as a student as a student would have in a city.
Gotcha. And so that actually leads me to the next question, which is, and I'm pretty sure you wrote this book pre-COVID, but your most upcoming book is entitled "Who Gets In and Why."
Yeah.
And can you explain to people what the book is about?
Yeah, so
And
so
yeah,
the book is so I lived a year inside the admissions process, the college admission process. I was embedded in 3 institutions, including one there in Atlanta at Emory, Davidson in North Carolina, just outside Charlotte, and the University of Virginia. I mean, sorry, University of Washington in Seattle. And so I lived inside those admissions offices for a year. I sat with their admissions officers, read applications with them, sat in committee meetings as they gave up and down votes on students. And so the book really follows that year to try to explain to people that admissions is, and I followed students and other companies that work in admissions to just show how big this ecosystem is. But at the end of the day, the book really shows how admissions is about institutional priorities, what the institution wants in its students, rather than really helping the students. So it's really focused on how admissions has become so much about the institution and not about the student applying. So you might be a perfect student and not get in because the institution you're not a priority for the institution.
okay.
College or
Actually,
university.
I want to. Yeah, can you actually talk about two things? One, the priority part of it first.
Yep. Yeah, so it's a lot of it's about priorities in terms of we want more men than women because women outnumber men now extensively in higher education. We want people
Okay.
from all 50 states, right? So if we fancy ourselves a national or international university, we want people from all over the world. So that limits the number of people we could pick from our backyard, for example. We need a variety of majors. We have sports, right? So we have to fill roster spots, and obviously those are students as well. So there's a list of priorities that colleges are trying to fill through admissions. And so as I always say, even if a college has a 25% acceptance rate, meaning they accept 25% of the students who apply, that doesn't mean you have a 1 in 4 chance of getting in, right? Because again, it matters who you are, what you've done, and what are the goods that you're bringing to the table for these institutions.
I'm glad you said that, because I think with the admissions process for a lot of people, it seems very mystical from the outside looking in. You don't really know. You kind of send your Hail Mary and hope you get in. Um, the other aspect of what you said about admissions I thought was interesting is you've talked about it just like the institutional priorities, right? And you
Yep.
kind of got into that as well. For people at home, when a university has a priority, how does the university come up with that priority? Like, I know you said, like, they've had, they want students from all 50 states necessarily, but like, how does the institution define what their priorities should be?
Usually they define them, but you don't know them from an
Okay,
outsider's
gotcha.
perspective, right? They don't give you the list, right? It's set by the board of trustees, the president. There's a mission to the college, like we want to serve. So you're in Atlanta. I've done a lot of work at Georgia State, right? They've wanted to really better serve students in the state of Georgia. So that's been a big priority for them, right? Where, a place like the University of Georgia wants to become more of a national research university.
Hmm.
So it depends on what your mission is and then how you fulfill that mission. And so again, this is not a list they publicly usually put up on their website, which makes it very difficult if you're a student applying for college because you have no idea what it really takes to get in.
Right. And so I want to ask about that with all that you've seen, in particular with the admissions process. What do you think is something about it that needs to be changed?
Well, it needs to be more transparent. People should have a better sense. And what do I mean by that? People should have a better sense when they're applying to a school, like generally what it takes to get in. So I think that definitely needs to change. I think there are certain pieces of it that really favor the most privileged in society. Early decision is one of them, right? So early decision is where you apply to school in October, November of your senior year, and you find out a month or two later if you're in, and then you have to go. You promise to go. Well, that really favors people who know what they want. It also favors people who don't need to compare financial aid offers from different institutions, and so that favors the wealthiest people applying to college. And it's something that in the book I call for doing away with.
Oh, okay.
So I think there's a couple of things there that I think to really, higher education has always been seen as an engine of mobility, right?
Hmm.
That talented people can get to college and really kind of move up in life. And we've kind of really lost that. And I think admissions is part of the reason we lost that, because we tend to favor the people that admissions has always helped. Legacies is another one, right?
Okay, yeah. I was gonna ask you
Legacy
about that.
admissions, right?
Right.
Alumni, right? That means if your father or grandfather went to college at that place, you get a leg up in admissions. Well, if my mother didn't go to college, right? So that doesn't really help me, right? And again, for the lowest income students in this country, for the first generation students, meaning they didn't have parents who went to college, for students of color and so forth, there are that really puts in high barriers to entry at many of these institutions.
Well, I'm glad you kind of brought that up because you have a podcast that people should
Yep,
know about. It's called Future You.
for you. Yep,
It's on, I believe, I have Apple Podcasts. I guess
yep,
it's on Spotify as well.
yep. It's on both.
Okay. But you had two of your more recent episodes were about, one was about the enrollment crunch. And can you explain to people what that was about, and because it kind of segues into what you were saying before.
Yeah. So right now we are, even before COVID, we were heading into what is going to be a dip in high school graduates in the next 5 or 6 years. So in
Mm.
2025, 2026, we're going to reach one of the lowest points in terms of high school graduates in
How did
the
we get
country,
there?
because of a birth deficit in the late, 2008, 2009, during the last recession.
Oh, wow.
Fewer
Okay.
people were having babies. Those are the people who would be going to college in 2025, 2026, 2028. I have a daughter who was born in 2009. She'll graduate high school in 2028, right? So exactly around this time. But what is also changing are demographics overall, right? There are many more Latino students, particularly. There are many more students in the South, in the West. There are going to be many more students or first in their family go to college. And none of these are students that we have served well as a higher education
Okay.
system. And we've talked a lot about this on the Future You podcast. Like, we have to really change our systems in ways to better serve these students, because if you want to keep colleges open, they have to figure out a way to enroll students who historically didn't enroll in college.
Okay. And so with that said, like, what are some of the strategies to get those students to enroll?
Well, I think we have to do better outreach. I think we need to find more money to help them enroll and afford college. I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. We have to figure out a way to cut costs so that college is more affordable for more people. To me, that is still the biggest barrier to college. Either people think it costs too much and they can't afford it, and they never even apply for financial aid, or never really kind of think about what is available to them because they think it's just out of reach, or it is literally out of reach for them once they even get financial aid. And as a result, they end up not going, or they end up not completing. And I think that's another thing I fear right now in the midst of COVID, is that a number of students in college right now, either because they've lost their job or their families have lost their job, they're not going to be able to go back and they will fall short of a degree.
And I'm glad you kind of brought that up and again, this is your expertise. And if you feel comfortable with it, which is what happens if those students do not reach college in your opinion or based on your research?
Well, a college degree right now is pretty much the only ticket to a middle class good job.
Okay.
The economic statistics show it. A bachelor's degree is the new high school diploma.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And if you don't have a bachelor's degree, finding a good job that will put you in the middle class for the long term is really hard. And so we need to get more people to have a college degree in this country. And the only way we're going to do that is to make this much more affordable.
Okay. And so, speaking of the issue of affordability, in terms of colleges, what does affordability look like for people who don't know? Like, what does that mean for people when they talk about affordable colleges?
Well, I think it has to be something where you could almost pay as you go, which
Okay.
is almost impossible anymore.
Yeah.
Or that you could pay with a Pell Grant, right? So a Pell Grant is a federal program. It's given to people with the lowest incomes. Normally, people under $40,000 a year qualify for a Pell Grant to go to college. The Pell Grant is a little under $6,000 a year in terms of its purchasing power, and it purchases, I think, something less than 50% of a college degree today. In other words, a college degree costs about $12,000 or much of that. And so what ends up happening is that students end up taking on loans. They end up taking on work. It may be too much work, so they can't complete college. I think we almost need to bring down the cost of education to something that people can cover with a Pell Grant, minimal amount of work, and maybe a small loan, not the $30,000 or $40,000 worth of loans that people are taking out now.
Okay. And so I want to ask you about that, which is the issue of student debt.
Yep.
I know there's been a lot of conversation in the last few years, especially during this presidential election, about either abolishing student debt or finding some way to reduce the burden of it or lower the cost of college. What is the long-term effects if student debt is not treated at all and just continues in the same way it's going?
Well, I think it's really worrisome because
Okay.
if you graduate with excessive debt, I would classify excessive debt as you should not borrow more than you probably expect to make in your first job.
Okay. Good point.
But most people borrow that or less. Average debt, I think, is low 30s
Okay.
of a student graduating with a bachelor's degree. It's much higher if you go to graduate school or law school. The problem is if you have too much debt, you're going to pick a job that maybe is not great because it just pays, or you're going to delay other life decisions. You're not going to buy a house. You're not going to move. There's so much when you saddle somebody in their early 20s with a lot of debt, particularly, by the way, if they never earn their degree, which happens, right? People go to
Yeah.
college, they take out debt, and then they never earn a degree for various reasons. That to me is really problematic and really worrisome. And so, again, another reason why we need to bring down the price of education.
Okay. And so, I just want to wrap up with you, Jeff.
Yep.
I'm glad you took time with me, which is what is something we haven't touched already that you would like people to know about the admissions process or college or your work in general?
So admissions, I think, is important because it really sets the stage for the rest of life. So employers hire people sometimes based on where they go. I'm not saying that's right, but based on where they went to college, on what they majored in college. Getting a college degree, as I said earlier, is so critical to economic success in life. And so admissions is the gatekeeper for that. It's the first stage of the rest of your life, and I think that as a result, it's a really critical thing to understand, and that's the main reason I wrote the book.
Oh, thank you for that. And Jeff, once again, how can people either find out more about your book or
Yep.
contact you or anything like that?
So jeffselingo.com is the best way. It's my website, Jeff S as in Sam Elingo, jeffselingo.com. Best way and then you can find my social media. You can find out about the book, order the book there, see my writing, see my speaking, do all that there.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And once again, you all, again, if you haven't gotten to Jeff's work right now, please visit his website. He also has a great podcast. I want you guys to check that out as well. And I'll put the podcast in the show notes as well for you all. Thank you, Jeff, for coming out. Oh, and by the way, the name is Future You Podcast. So
Yes.
you like university,
Yep.
not YOU. And once again, this is King Williams. You are listening to the Neighborhood Watch podcast. Please like and review wherever you heard this at or saw this at. Once again, if you liked it, review it. Please give it the best review that you can. And if you haven't already, please sign up for my newsletter at iamkingwilliams.substack.com. iamkingwilliams.substack.com. Once again, thank you, Jeff Selingo, for taking the time out to talk to me today. And make sure you all get his book in the fall.
Thank you, King.
All right. Thank you.